Welcome back for another deep dive. You guys sent in some really interesting stuff from this Robert Greene interview, so let's dive into all that.
You know, what's so fascinating about Greene is that he really practices what he preaches. It's not just theory with him. He's lived a life full of, well, let's just say he's seen a lot, especially after his stroke.
Yeah, and he doesn't shy away from that. In fact, he seems to embrace those challenges and use them to fuel his work. Like that idea he talks about, the
Yeah.
realistic attitude. It's not about putting on rose-colored glasses, but really taking stock of who you are, warts and all.
Exactly. He's all about that honest self-assessment, figuring out what you're good at, where you struggle, and even those tendencies, the ones we don't always like to admit to.
Mhm.
Because for Greene, that self-awareness is crucial for, well, pretty much everything, navigating the world, achieving your goals, all of it.
It's like he's saying, look, you can't fix what you don't acknowledge, right? And I think that's so important because it's easy to get caught up in appearances, our own and other people's.
100%. It's so easy to get fooled by facades. But that realistic attitude, that's what helps us see through all that,
Yeah.
helps us make clearer decisions, whether it's in our careers or our relationships, because we're not blinded by illusions.
It's about dealing with reality head on, and he even calls this the most powerful attitude one can have, which I find kind of refreshing, honestly. But it
Yeah.
gets even more interesting because he doesn't just stop there. Green also encourages us to embrace the, let's call it the darker aspects of ourselves, which he touches on a lot in the 48 Laws of Power.
Absolutely. That's a thread that runs through a lot of his work. He's saying those emotions that we often try to push down, like anger, frustration, even ambition, those emotions hold a lot of energy. And if we can learn to channel that energy effectively, well, it can be a powerful source of fuel for creation, for making things happen.
Okay, now hold on a second. I got to stop you there.
Mm.
How do we even begin to do that? Embrace those emotions without letting them control us. It sounds like a tightrope walk.
I hear you. It definitely takes practice. But it's important to remember Green isn't saying we should all become, villains or something. It's about recognizing that we're complex beings with a full spectrum of emotions. And those emotions, even the ones we label as negative, they have a purpose. They can teach us about ourselves, motivate us to make changes.
So instead of getting consumed by anger, for example, we could use that energy to create something, make something positive.
Exactly. And Green actually talks about this in the interview. He shares how working in Hollywood, an industry that can be, well, let's just say it's no secret that it has its fair share of hypocrisy. That whole experience really frustrated him, and he ended up channeling that frustration into writing The 48 Laws of Power.
Wow, so he literally turned his frustration with Hollywood into a bestseller. That's pretty impressive.
It's a perfect example of what he's talking about. He took a negative experience and transformed it into something powerful and insightful. And that's something we can all do.
It really makes you think about what we label as negative. What if those emotions are just untapped potential waiting to be channeled into something meaningful?
Exactly. And often acknowledging those emotions instead of shying away from them is the first step toward growth and achieving our goals.
So we've talked about embracing those so-called negative emotions, seeing them as potential sources of energy instead of something to be feared. Now, let's talk about another area where people tend to get tripped up, and that's failure. I mean, just the word itself makes most people cringe, but Green seems to have a completely different take on it.
He does. He actually seems to embrace failure. He talks about it as being not just inevitable, but get this, invaluable. Like it's through those failures that we actually discover our limits, where we need to improve, and maybe even more importantly, how to bounce back from setbacks.
Okay, I get the concept in theory, but our brains are kind of hardwired to avoid failure at all costs. So how do we actually shift our perspective on something that feels so fundamentally uncomfortable?
Well, Green breaks it down in a way that makes a lot of sense. He basically sees failure as data. Like each setback, each time we don't succeed, it's giving us valuable information that we can then use to refine our approach and ultimately be more successful.
Did he give any examples of how he's applied this in his own life? Because sometimes I think those real-life examples really help drive the point home.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, he talks about how his first draft of the 50th law was actually rejected by the publisher. Can you imagine that even Robert Greene, the master strategist himself, facing rejection?
Wow, I guess everyone gets rejected sometimes, even those at the top of their game.
Yeah,
Kind of reassuring in a weird way.
it is. And what's really interesting is how he responded to that rejection. Instead of giving up or getting discouraged, he used it as an opportunity to rework and improve the book. He even says that experience taught him some of his most valuable lessons about writing.
You know, it's funny how we often put these successful authors and entrepreneurs on a pedestal, forgetting that they're human too. They've all faced their share of setbacks.
Exactly. It's their ability to learn from those setbacks and keep moving forward that sets them apart. They don't let failure define them, they use it as fuel.
So it's not about avoiding failure altogether, but changing our relationship with it, seeing those so-called failures as stepping stones, as opportunities for growth and learning.
100%. What if we started approaching those daunting tasks not with fear of failure, but with curiosity and a willingness to experiment? What could we achieve if we weren't so afraid to stumble along the way?
Now, that's a perspective shift I can get behind. Speaking of navigating potentially scary terrain, Green also delves into the world of relationships, particularly the role money plays in them. It's a topic that can be, well, let's just say it can get a little complicated. What's his take on this whole dynamic?
He makes a really interesting distinction. He argues that it's not necessarily money itself that's the issue in relationships, but what that money, or the lack of it, signals to the other person.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Like if someone is financially unstable, it might raise concerns about their responsibility, ambition, things like that.
Exactly. And on the flip side, financial success can sometimes be interpreted as a sign of ambition, drive, maybe even generosity, depending on how someone uses their wealth.
He does talk about generosity being a big factor, right? Like
Yeah.
a lack of generosity can be a red flag regardless of how much money someone has.
Right. He says that being ungenerous or even lacking ambition can actually be more of a turnoff than not having a lot of money.
It's about the whole package, isn't it? Someone's character, their values, those core qualities that make them who they are. It's not just about the number in their bank account.
It goes so much deeper than that. And it reminds me of another one of Greene's central themes, the importance of cultivating inner power, which he believes starts with self-knowledge.
Ah, yes, that ancient Greek wisdom, know thyself. It seems to be a recurring theme for Green. Why do you think that is?
Well, he believes that understanding our own motivations and desires, really knowing who we are at our core, is crucial for navigating the world around us, especially in a world that's constantly trying to influence us.
It's about having that internal compass, that sense of self-assuredness that comes from truly understanding yourself and what you stand for. But doubt is something we all struggle with, right? So how does Green suggest we tackle those pesky self-doubts that inevitably creep in?
He doesn't sugarcoat it. He acknowledges that doubt is a normal part of the human experience, but he also believes we have the power to overcome it. And it's not through wishful thinking or positive affirmations, but through action.
So less thinking, more doing.
Precisely. He believes that by repeatedly confronting our fears, whatever form they take, we can lessen their power over us.
It's like they say, right? Feel the fear and do it anyway. But sometimes it's easier said than done. It's interesting, though, how Green emphasizes that action piece because so often we get stuck in our heads, overthinking everything.
It's true. We can analyze and strategize all day long, but until we actually take that first step, nothing changes. And that's what's so refreshing about Greene's approach. He's all about giving you the tools to actually make a change.
Absolutely. He doesn't just tell you what to think. He gives you a framework for actually doing something about it. And speaking of overcoming challenges, we've talked a lot about Greene's ideas in his work, but we can't overlook the fact that he's faced some pretty major challenges in his own life. A few years back, he had a stroke, and that experience really had a profound impact on him. I'm curious to know how that event shaped his perspective, especially when it comes to dealing with those curveballs that life throws our way.
He's been remarkably open about how that experience, as difficult as it was, really forced him to reevaluate his priorities. He talks about how it made him appreciate each day so much more, finding those moments of gratitude, even when things are tough.
It's amazing how those really challenging experiences can often lead to those kinds of shifts in perspective. It makes you realize what's truly important. Did he mention any specific practices or mindsets that helped him navigate that difficult time?
Yeah, he talks about the importance of asking empowering questions. So instead of letting yourself spiral into negativity, asking yourself things like, could this be worse? Or what can I learn from this? Even in those really tough moments, trying to find a different perspective.
It's about finding that glimmer of hope, that opportunity for growth, even when things feel really dark. We all face setbacks. It's inevitable. But it's how we choose to respond to those challenges that really shapes our experience.
And that's what's so inspiring about Greene, right? He doesn't shy away from those difficult topics, and he doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but he encourages us to keep asking questions, keep searching for meaning and understanding, even when it's hard.
He reminds us that it's okay to embrace those complexities, those contradictions that make us human. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, haven't we? From harnessing our darker emotions and reframing failure to navigating relationships and cultivating inner power, Greene's work offers such a practical and insightful guide to navigating the complexities of life.
I completely agree. And what makes his work so compelling is that it's not just theoretical, it's grounded in his own experiences. He's walked the walk, so to speak, which makes his insights that much more relatable and impactful.
He's living proof that these principles, these strategies, they actually work. And I think that's incredibly inspiring no matter where you are in your own journey. So as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with one final thought, a challenge of sorts, inspired by Greene's own exploration of the sublime. It's this idea of actively seeking out experiences that expand our minds, those moments that connect us to something bigger than ourselves. So what's one thing you can do this week to tap into that sense of the sublime? It could be anything. Trying a new activity, exploring a different part of your town, starting a conversation with someone you wouldn't normally talk to, whatever feels expansive and maybe even a little bit scary. Because it's often in those moments of stepping outside our comfort zones that we discover something new, not just about the world, but about ourselves. Thanks for diving deep with us.